Welcome to the Infrastructure Podcast. My name is Anthony Oliver, and today we are focusing on the UK's mammoth, unprecedented and often highly controversial water investment challenge. As climate pressures mount, population grows and economic demands increase, the security of our water supply is becoming a defining issue for national resilience. Now, last December, Ofwat's latest price review, PR24, underscored the scale of that challenge, with more than £48 billion in capital investment planned across England and Wales over the next 5 years. At the heart of this effort is the need to secure an additional 5 billion litres of water per day by 2050, and that's equivalent to more than a third of the current supply. So this is a national endeavour, and the RAPID programme, launched by Ofwat in 2019 to oversee water company spending and prompt a more collaborative approach to investment, is now being scaled up to deliver a new generation of strategic water infrastructure in the water company's latest 5-year asset management plans. But meeting these goals will require not just infrastructure, but public trust, regulatory innovation and cross-sector collaboration. All issues, of course, that are being reviewed for government right now by Sir John Cunliffe, Chair of the Independent Water Commission. Well, my guest today is at the sharp end of this challenge. Siân Thomas is Director of Strategic Asset Management at Anglian Water, one of the biggest and perhaps most progressive water companies, serving 7 million customers across the east of England. Siân is delivering Anglian's AMP8 business plan, the largest in its history, including 2 new reservoirs, significant upgrades to water recycling and mains networks, and a commitment to cut emissions and improve river health. So, well placed to give great insight into the challenges, and clearly she's got a lot of work to do. So, Siân, welcome to the Infrastructure Podcast.
Thanks, Anthony. Really great to be here. Really looking forward to chatting with you this morning.
Well, so am I, because it's a lot to do. But let's start at the top. I mean, I said Ofwat's PR24 review calls for a step change in infrastructure investment. I mean, this feels, Siân, like a pivotal moment for the future of water in the UK. I mean, do you believe that the water sector is currently structured is capable of delivering on the scale and pace required?
Oh, it's a huge opportunity for UK PLC and UK Water. And if I focus just to start with on sort of Anglian's portfolio and what we've got to deliver in the next AMP, we can deliver what's needed, because in Anglian we've got a mature alliancing model. The One Alliance been running for 20 years, and we're in really good shape to sort of step in and deliver the programme that's expected of us. But we will need to come up with solutions to problems we haven't faced before, not only the scale of the investment being unprecedented, but the projects we're developing. So our new reservoirs are once in a generation projects and things that we haven't done before. So we will need to work with sort of the regulators and the processes that exist to really say, how do they need to change to enable this investment? So for our reservoirs, we're looking at using a similar model for that which was used on Tideway, but it's only been done once before. So lots to work through. Right. And we've got to attract investment. So spending all this money doesn't come for free. We've got to attract the investment into the industry to make sure that we can spend and deliver what's expected of us.
Well, with over 48 billion in capital investment projected to be spent, and I suppose maybe decades of consequences ahead as a result of that, I mean, how do you think the balance should be struck between building all this lovely new infrastructure and also maintaining the vast amount of existing assets that are already out there?
So we know that we do need new infrastructure, but we and others have got quite a lot of concern around, being able to invest in our existing infrastructure. So being able to look after asset health over kind of years to come and way into the future. And asset health is a huge issue for us, and one of the reasons why we as Anglian Water and others have gone to the Competition and Markets Authority around the final determinations for PR24. So we've got to get that balance right between investing for the new and enhancing the environment and delivering new things, as well as making sure those assets we've already got work as well as they could do. And a focus on keeping bills low over the last 10, 15 years has really challenged the water industry to be able to do that and maintain what's existing, as well as do all those new sort of enhancement projects that we need to.
Yeah, because I suppose the scale of ambition It's also matched by intense scrutiny from regulators, from politicians, and from the public. So, while you can talk about building new, shiny stuff, people also want to make sure that the existing networks are actually working correctly as well. How do businesses like Anglian Water tread that tricky path to balance public expectations, environmental responsibilities, and long-term investment?
Yeah, it's really challenging for the industry as a whole. And just thinking about the sort of asset value that exists in the water industry. So I think the replacement value of what we've got today is about £700 billion.
Yeah.
So that's in terms of keeping that asset base up to date. You need to spend quite a lot to maintain it and keep it in good shape. And if you look at the manufacturing sector, they spend around 2% per year on their capital maintenance, so keeping things in good shape that already exist. But in terms of what the PR24 final determinations have got for the water sector, it's about 0.4% of that replacement value by year. So we've got an awful lot of catching up to do as a water industry to keep on top of our existing assets and deliver for today, as well as the big shiny new stuff, which is super exciting to be part of.
Yeah. Well, particularly when I suppose you imagine that 0.4, if you've been underspending not just for a few years, you've been underspending for decades. So there's a lot to do there. I mean, you just spoke at a major projects association conference. It was on building green Britain, and talked about the need for cultural shift to drive this green transition. And I mentioned the review being carried out for government by Sir John Cunliffe, chair of the Independent Water Commission. I mean, do you think the regulatory framework and the customer willingness to pay are really aligned with the scale of the investment challenge that we now face?
So I think it's fair to say we've definitely got reservations about how the current regulatory model works and how the regulators work together, and the sort of I guess the challenges of expectation from environmental enhancement, the affordability and a sort of efficiency challenge, which is quite right to throw at the industry in terms of keeping things running today. But then that expectation and the change in expectation from the public around how water companies perform. And it's quite right to put us under scrutiny and hold us to account. But if we think back kind of 15, 20 years when we first started talking about Tideway, part of the challenge was, well, who on earth would want to pay to clean up the river? Roll forward where we are today, there's an awful lot of people that are, it's a great job that's been done and it's doing amazing things to clean up the River Thames. But the world is quite different in terms of what's expected from our sewerage systems. Yeah.
I should just explain, I suppose, that before you joined Anglian, you were deeply involved in the Tideway project for Thames Water, hence your deep knowledge about that. And we'll come on to that a bit later on. But of course, Mark Thurston, the former HS2 chief executive, is now head of Anglian Water. That presumably is having some impact.
Anglian Water is a great organisation, and the values within it and the purpose and what have you were developed under Peter Simpson's leadership. So it's a great sort of organisation to be in. I think Peter's retirement and Mark's joining the organisation has been timely in the context of the huge infrastructure investment that we're going to make. So as an organisation, we're sort of transitioning from a water company into an infrastructure deliverer. So it's great having somebody like Mark at the helm, because he's asking all the right questions about infrastructure delivery and helping us focus on what we need to.
Yeah, well, I'll better tee him up to get him on the podcast soon then. But right now, talking about, you mentioned the financial pressures, and the industry, like every industry, is facing cost inflation, supply chain risks, and really trying to maintain that delivery certainty across long-term capital programs. I mean, how does Anglian Water manage that?
I think Anglian Water have been seen for quite some time as at the forefront of engaging with supply chain, and we've already mentioned that one, and the fact that is 20 years old now, that alliancing model. And so we've learnt a lot over those 20 years, and it's been an exemplar through Infrastructure Client Group, sort of the routing of the Project 13 enterprise model. All's got kind of, you can point back to that Anglian Water experience in developing that. And so that's where we've worked really closely with supply chain partners over a period of time. So there's really great visibility of the pipeline of work over each asset management period. Those folks are involved in and incentivized to sort of chase efficiency. And so just that visibility and the way in which we've been able to work with that supply chain has set us up really, really well for success. And so in the last year of AMP7, which we've just finished, we were delivering about as much work as we need to deliver in this first year of this next AMP. So we've been working with that supply chain to slowly kind of increase our capacity. But, we've got more to do. So even with that supply chain, we've got to grow and we've got to learn and we've got to drive sort of further forward. And the whole industry has got to increase its expenditure. And so both in terms of that supply chain capacity, we still need that investment. So we need to support the regulatory model being such that it's attractive to invest in UK water. And that's part of the big challenge today.
And a lot of that attractiveness comes down to really nailing that whole political and public perception of what you're doing. Let's talk a bit more about that, because you spoke, I say, about the MPA event, about cultural shift. And I suppose in light of the growing public scrutiny over leakage, over storm overflows, over executive pay, I mean, what is the water industry's plan for regaining that public trust and I suppose making it into that truly investable industry?
Yeah, it's a really, really sort of tough place for some folks in the water industry today and others that are sort of new to it. And one of the things we, absolutely should be held to account for what we're expected to deliver, and absolutely should be subject to that scrutiny because, pollution is unacceptable. One of the reasons I joined the water industry in the first place was because I love canoeing and swimming and being out in the water. So there's an awful lot of people within the industry who are motivated to protect the environment. And so it's quite important for us to, I think, remember that, and for the public to remember that, people do this because they care, not because they're chasing it.
Yeah. Do you think water companies have communicated that link between large-scale investment, the need to spend money, and long-term water resilience and sustainability clear enough to customers and politicians?
Well, I think that's certainly something that we're working on, and the conversations around the Cunliffe Review and kind of helping people understand their relationship with water, how they use water, the kind of whole cycle is something that we need to really work hard at. But we know we need to do better to meet people's expectations and meet the public's expectations, to drive that investment, to help people understand where the money goes. Yeah. And what they get for that money. And for us, part of rebuilding that trust is actually doing what we said we were going to do through this next asset management period and helping people see that, as well as, supporting the conversations around the Cunliffe Review, and making sure that we're working with our regulators to drive that regulatory reform and, help UK PLC understand what water's all about.
Because the reality, Siân, is that there are some political voices calling for renationalisation, and I suppose it comes down to organisations like Anglian to really demonstrate its accountability to the public it serves. Is that possible?
Yeah, so I think we absolutely must be transparent, and certainly Anglian and other water companies, we've got a customer board, we've got an independent challenge group. And then the other key thing that Anglian Water did some time ago was drive its purpose and establish purpose into its Articles of Association. So Anglian's had that in its Articles of Association since about 2019. And so that's really focused on, whilst providing a return to shareholders, actually it's much more focused on bringing environmental and social prosperity to our region. So what does that mean for us, and how do we drive that lens and that thinking into all the decisions that we're making? And so that for us is kind of part of enabling some of that transparency. And this year, as part of our annual report, we're going to publish our purpose accounts. So they'll cover a range of measures that show our environmental and societal impact and the things that we're doing, both the positive and the negative. And we're hoping that over time we'll be able to show how the things that we're doing actually have an impact on that purpose outcome. And
I suppose justify to the public why bills maybe are going up or why you or how you're giving them a good value for the money that they're investing in you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the other thing that I've been really fortunate to be part of since joining Anglian Water, I sit on our Beacon board. So Beacon is a project where we're partnering with WaterAid in Nepal to bring clean water and sanitation to sort of some deprived communities in a province in Lahan. And that's really humbling, because that's really reminds me of the privilege we have in the UK to be able to turn on our taps and flush the toilet for less than half a cup of coffee that you might buy on your way to work in the morning. And so contextually, I think there's something we can do as an industry to keep reminding people of the privilege and the relative cost of what we get.
Perhaps a good moment to find out a bit more about you, Siân. As I say, you've joined Anglian just over a year ago now, having rejoined the water industry after 3 years leading Network Rail's asset management. Of course, you're no stranger, as you said, to water, having spent nearly 6 years on the Thames Tideway project, building a vast £5 billion super sewer beneath London, a project which, of course, you first worked on in 2002 and spent 8 years planning the first iteration. What did that project teach you about infrastructure delivery?
Yeah, so as you say, Anthony, I've had a couple of stints on the Tideway project. So it was actually a couple of years in the early development phase. And I think at the time there were probably 4 or 5 of us that were working on Tideway. So in those very early stages, it was all about how, what are our strategies for the scheme progression? How do we navigate this uncertainty of will we, won't we? How are you going to justify the scheme? And then mobilising and building a team from scratch and sort of selecting our programme management partner. So in those really early stages, I learnt lots about that early stage formation and kind of pulling teams together. My second stint on Tideway was when we we're a standalone entity. So we were pulling the alliance on board. It was when Andy Mitchell came in as chief exec. And my role was all around sort of system-wide sponsorship and effectively reminding the excited tunnellers that the tunnel had a job to do at the end of the day. So that kind of golden thread of why we're here and what's the purpose of this project. So learning lots about that. I think the other thing from Tideway for me was around my doctorate. So I took the opportunity to study for a doctorate whilst at Tideway, and I looked at collaboration between teams in mega projects. So lots of observation and studying and reflection on how was our alliance forming and how were the teams working together across that alliance. So took lots from that in terms of, watching people work togeting.
Which presumably is one of the reasons that you were attracted to Anglian, because Anglian, as we mentioned earlier, has got a strong track record in alliancing and bringing teams together. Is that what was behind that move? Yeah,
I think there are a couple of things. So Anglian, yes, as a water company, kind of a good one, attracted to the purpose piece, the real commitment to the environment and social prosperity. I think the other thing around the role for me was around bringing together that big project experience and the excitement of being involved in our reservoir projects, as well as the asset management experience I'd gained from Thames previously and then Network Rail. And it just brought it together in one role that's perfectly sort of Siân shaped, I guess. And being able to put some of that learning to good use somewhere new and somewhere different was a really great opportunity for me.
Well, you also are a honorary professor at the UCL Bartlett School of Construction and Project Management, and it's a role you've held for over 6 years. It's quite renowned in terms of forming many of the project managers that we see in the industry now. Why is it such a special environment?
I think I was fortunate to get involved with UCL through my doctoral work. So whilst I studied at Cranfield, quite a lot of my work overlapped with some of the work that Simon Adderman and others at UCL were doing at the time. And I think just having that focal point, that centre of excellence in sort of teaching and research for project management means it's got a really great collection of folks both within the school and the honorary sort of folks that are around it, because it's really important that we keep learning and we keep sort of sharing that knowledge as we learn on big projects, and so it's a really neat kind of very neat privilege to be part of. And of course, I've recently launched the Major Infrastructure MBA, which in and of itself is just focused on supporting, educating people in that space.
Yeah. Well, your background is rooted in project management, in oil and gas, in water and in rail, but it's an area which, to be fair, much of the infrastructure sector still struggles with. I mean, why is that? Why do we seem to be reasonably poor at project management? Is that fair? I don't know.
I don't know. I'm not sure it's fair. I think the thing for me is it's really important to remember that the benefits of delivery of projects and these mega projects quite often outweigh or probably sort of help us forget the challenges through delivery quite soon after they're done. So, Heathrow Terminal 5, I mean, it was a success, but we talk about the challenge of the planning process, the supply chain innovation, and we keep referring to it as an exemplar. London 2012 was amazing. Crossrail, whilst, quite tricky, if you look now and travel on the Elizabeth line, we talk about how amazing it is, not kind of the learning through the project. But I think there's something about these big projects around the inherent risk, the complexity, the long time frames. All the decision making is really challenging because there's so many people involved in that piece. The projects are often unique, so Tideway's unique, reservoirs we've not done since 92. And then I think often we get stuck on the cost estimating piece around, well, it was supposed to cost this. Well, actually, when you're using cost to make decisions and choices between one project or another, that's a quite different cost estimate to this is actually the scope that we're going to work on and deliver and be measured against. And once you get the scope, it's much easier to manage to a number. But things move through that development phase, which we often forget, I think.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about your own kind of approach to water. Anglian talks about the need to love every drop. I mean, what do you do personally to minimise your own water footprint?
Yeah, it's funny. I was reflecting. So I sort of two things have sort of made that inherent into me, I think, from a child. So a child of the 70s in the droughts, we had stickers everywhere around sort of saving every drop of water and not letting things go down the plug hole. And then also as a grad at Thames, I can remember learning so early on that I turn the tap off when I clean my teeth. And so super sort of simple things. So I think, I've always got a dirty car. My garden's terrible. It never gets watered. So I don't have a beautiful garden. And I constantly kind of battle with my other half around leaving taps running and turning things on and off. So really sort of small things, but super conscious and probably a nag to other people. And sort of just remembering, again, referring to sort of my experience with WaterAid, just reminding people of how precious it is, let alone kind of the efficiency opportunity.
Well, I mean, it sounds like you're thinking about water quite a lot of your life. And what do you do? You live in Reading, and I imagine that means travelling quite a lot to get around the Anglian region, which is quite vast. But how do you decompress from the busy world of project management? What do you get up to? You got a dog? You do some canoeing? What else? What do you get up to?
Yeah. So generally anything that involves being outside, I think, is the thing, or are the things that help me decompress. So live in Reading. Huge relationship with the River Thames, so I go canoeing. When it's warm, I'd probably swim. Walking or attempting to run with the collie cross that I have. So she's pretty energetic and kind of keeps me sort of fit. And then just spending time with my partner Andy, family and friends, and sort of eating and drinking and sort of experiencing new places and new foods and drink.
By canoeing, that's the open canoes, or you mean kayaking as the ones that are closed in? Then
kayaking.
I'm not an expert. Kayaking.
Kayaking generally, yeah. So I years ago, or a couple of times, I've done the Devizes to Westminster canoe race, but probably 15 plus years ago last time I did it. So now just dabble to relax and sort of enjoy the scenery, really.
Right, yeah. Well, look, back to water investment. I mentioned the rapid approach to investment. Just give us a quick tour of how you see that is actually helping and maybe succeeding in accelerating the development of strategic resource options. So
the intent of the rapid group is awesome and really essential to enable us to drive things forward. And we're having some really good conversations in terms of sharing between water companies and across the strategic resource option projects, and lots, which is really, asking about the questions about what are the things we can do to unlock development. I think it's fair to say, though, planning's still an issue. We're hoping the Planning and Infrastructure Bill will help some of those challenges. There's, huge environmental considerations, and the Habitat Regulations Assessment and Water Framework Directive piece cause us lots of, challenge in terms of working through some of those. And I think there's something that we're working with Rapid on around just how do we get Rapid, Ofwat, DEFRA and the agency kind of almost more involved in that decision making, so that just switching hats from traditional regulator to absolute enabler of the projects. And, there's lots of great people who are keen to support, but we just need to work some of that through to turn it into results rather than the theory of it.
I mean, do you feel that the programme or the Rapid programme is sufficiently balancing innovation? I mean, I mentioned desalination and water recycling, which are, I suppose, relatively new in the UK. Are they sufficiently balancing those kind of ideas with cost control and environmental scrutiny, which you could argue are the more traditional measures? Yeah,
I think we've collectively we've got a really tough job to do in the UK in terms of addressing the water scarcity challenge, and we know that we need a variety of sources to address it. And whilst land for reservoirs is pretty significant, it's a really sustainable way of collecting water. So collecting it in the winter when there's too much, storing it, and then putting it in supply when it's actually needed. But we've been funded in Anglia for development of 2 desalination schemes in our region through this AMP and a advanced wastewater treatment and recycling scheme at Colchester. And so we're going to be really focused on working through those challenges around how do you make it a reality? How do you get the technology right? How do we work through the acceptability piece and the energy challenge? So really focused on working that through with Rapid and others over the next 5-year period, as well as looking at different ways of or changing our relationship with water. So through the Ofwat Innovation Fund, we're partners in a project looking at enabling water smart communities. So that's looking at our whole relationship with water and sort of reuse on site and integrated water management much more broadly, which is a really exciting way to address the challenge.
Well, it's a huge challenge, huge opportunities. AMP8 represents Anglian Water's largest ever investment. You said you've got 2 new reservoirs planned, desalination plants. What lessons have you drawn from previous major infrastructure developments in terms of stakeholder engagement and land use planning and getting these projects up and running?
Yeah, so there are great examples out there around where folks have done it really well. So London 2012 was great. Tideway and there's lots of learning from HS2. And we've recently been through the DCO process for Cambridge wastewater treatment plant relocation. So learned lots about our kind of stakeholders and how to run those kind of engagements locally. On our reservoirs, we've completed 2 rounds of consultation, and we're going to have another 2 rounds, which will support in terms of how are we going to construct? How does the reservoir system interact with the water collection? And we've also done quite a lot of work around master planning. So recognising, the necessity of good design. So I'm really lucky that I'm the design champion for our reservoir project. So I'm sufficiently removed from the day-to-day decision making that I can ask the awkward questions and check the process is right. But making sure we've got that golden thread of the objective and sort of vision we're aiming for through those decisions.
Yeah. Which is where your love every drop, I mentioned your love every drop ethos at Anglian. It is about influencing project design, particularly when it comes to integrating people, nature, and place into your design process. How do you measure the long-term environmental and social return when it comes to the investment, the vast investment that you're putting in across the AMP8 portfolio?
So we're really lucky in the Anglian region. So we've got Graffham and Rutland Water that have been our assets for some time. And if you just look at how they're used now in terms of destinations for visitors, protected nature reserves, the sort of level of water sport use and recreation that is done sort of on those sites, there's huge value there. And so we know that that's kind of where we're headed on our reservoir projects, but it's going to take time to get there. And so what we need to be really focused on in our design activity is making sure that we're enabling that in time to come. I think if we think about big projects in general, though, it's really important to recognise that impact through construction. And so that's where most of the pain for the local communities will come through that construction phase. So we're looking at things around, well, how can we minimise that, obviously through that period, but how can we accelerate some of that benefit for folks so that we're trying to minimise or mitigate that risk through construction, as well as keep that end in mind around how we do it. And measurement wise, there's lots to learn from Tideway and others in terms of how they've brought those numbers to bear and kind of really made their social environmental impact tangible.
Yeah, but of course, it goes without saying perhaps that climate or a changing climate is altering many of the strategic assumptions underpinning businesses like Anglian Water's long-term water resource management plans. But what role does behaviour change and smart metering play in the future of water resilience? How can you support your customers to help them to change their consumption habits? Because that presumably is key to the entire investment strategy.
Yeah, so smart meters are a really key part of our demand management strategy in Anglian Water, and will absolutely help us reduce the sort of per capita consumption, so how much each sort of household uses. And earlier this year, we got the first 1.1 million smart meters installed across our region. So that was hitting the target we had for AMP7. And our plan is to have smart meters across the region by 2030. So I think we'll be the first water company that will have done that. And just people knowing what they're using and making it visible is an incredibly powerful relationship. And so we've got lots of smart meters out there, and we're seeing some of the impact around people, using less water, seeing the impact on their bills, and obviously because they're using less. But it's also, for us as the water company, helps us get better visibility of leaks, which we might not have seen previously. So people understanding what they're using and how their own system is working. We've saved about 14 million litres of water from going to waste every day just by the extra visibility we've got through the smart meters. So it's really essential part of the demand management programme.
Huge opportunities there, definitely using technology and I'd say just huge opportunities to try to improve that relationship that people have with their water. But looking ahead to AMP9 and beyond, what do you believe has to change, whether it's politically, financially and regulatory, for the UK to sustain its long-term water security?
So we've thought long and hard in some of our responses to Cunliffe and what have you around what those changes might need to be. So there's a piece around stability and balance in the regulation and the regulatory framework so that we can attract that investment. So investors know what they're getting into and they can understand that return. There's something about the framework joining regulators together so that things are better connected and there's a sort of more coherence. So the timing of an environmental decision will match with a funding allowance decision. There's a piece around the long-term vision and enabling, making really good use of 25-year planning and what have you to drive decisions in the short term, because that will help us build resilience in the long term. And then just being really clear that in order to attract investment and invest hugely in big infrastructure, the regulatory model needs to support it. So we need to be really focused on driving that forward. And so there's a real need for that strategic direction, the joining of the dots, and making sure that we're getting the risk-reward balance right for our investors.
So does that put us on track to achieve the same, as you put it, building Green Britain? Going back to the industry review by Sir John Cunliffe, what does he need to say?
Yeah, so I think it's a huge opportunity, a really exciting time for the industry, because the the time for reform is now, and there's a real need, and there seems to be a real will to do it. But we really need to see that review addressing some of the challenges that we and others have sort of submitted. And those reforms need to really focus on that investable proposition piece, because the scale of investment is huge. We need to make sure we've got the money to be able to do it. And back to the point we talked about a good while ago around asset health. We know it's a big issue for the industry, so we need to be able to get that balance right between new stuff, but also addressing the assets we've got today. So, really great opportunity, and lots to be after. So fingers crossed he comes up with a good set of feedback.
Well, thanks, Siân. It is really interesting. There's no question that we do have some big issues to resolve around water, and the reality also is that the money is all going to be coming from the public actually paying for that water. So big challenges, big opportunities. But thanks very much for sharing your thoughts today on the Infrastructure Podcast.
Thanks, Anthony. Really great to talk to you.
Well, sadly, we could talk about this whole issue for a lot longer, but that's all we've got time for now on the podcast. But there is more in the pipeline as we continue to probe the big issues facing the sector. If you haven't done so already, do check out the Infrastructure Podcast website, www.infrastructure-podcast.com, where you will find background information and all the latest podcasts to listen to and to share. So, thanks for joining us. Thanks again to Siân, and I look forward to seeing you again very soon.